All right, so good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, excited to talk about automation. It's a passion of mine. I really like testing, automation, anything to do with engineering, all types, so thanks for coming. I just want to get kind of an idea of the makeup of the audience here. So who here in the audience is primarily in a technical role? Okay, so kind of half and half sort of thing. Okay, I try not to go too far down the rabbit hole of the technical. Whose company does automation right now? Okay, so that's a good number of people. Great, okay. And last question is, who thinks that they've solved all the problems with test automation? Oh yes, good answer, Ben. See, he's a ringer because he's my boss, so. We haven't either. It's definitely a work in progress, so hopefully we can share some ideas and help each other, definitely. So just let me start by introducing myself. I'm engineering manager at Mobify, so I work on the customer success team. Our team's around 40 people, and it's divided into 4 delivery teams and 1 ops team. The delivery teams are small, agile teams that consist of engineers, designers, mobile developers that do HTML and CSS, and QA. And then the ops team kind of services those teams and helps with tooling and support and that type of thing. So we have lots of projects on the go all the time, and so automation is really important for us. So who's Mobify? Has anyone heard of Mobify before? A few people, not too many. Okay, great. So I'll just go through what we do. So Mobify is primarily a software as a service company. We're founded in 2007, and we develop and use open source software to build highly performant mobile websites, in a nutshell. So there's a few ways that you can take things mobile. The first is you can build a native app. That's great. Native apps are fantastic, great performance, costly to develop, and you also have to have in-house expertise, so an iOS dev or an Android dev. So that's one solution. You can also build your own MDOT, so a small subsite of a main desktop site, which would be effectively building a whole new site altogether, and all the maintenance cost that is associated with that comes along with building that. You could go responsive. So responsive is kind of trendy these days. People use responsive as a really nice umbrella term, and usually they mean media queries to when someone scales their browser to change the viewport and change what you're seeing. So that's one option. Performance is something that people don't consider all the time when they're thinking of responsive. When you're delivering a gigantic desktop site down to a mobile device and shrinking things down and hiding things, you're still making the same amount of requests out to the server that you were on the desktop site. So arguably not the best approach. You could also potentially use what they call a proxy solution to go mobile. So it routes a desktop request through another server, manipulates the HTML, and then delivers it down to the device, maybe a subset of that HTML. That also routes your site through someone else's server, so that can be an issue with data and privacy. So that's maybe something to consider there as well. So Mobify takes a different approach. We leverage the existing desktop site, and we actually transform that desktop site down to mobile. We do it dynamically. It's very easy. It's quick for us to develop these sites, and it's very, very easy for a client to deploy these sites as well. So that's the appeal. Some of the clients that we service you may recognize, you may not. We're used by many, many major brands. They're high traffic e-commerce sites primarily. So you can understand how they need to be very well tested. We don't have the luxury of launching a site and having the traffic build over time. We launch right into a high traffic site. So it's very, very important that our sites work really, really well. Because they're e-commerce sites, we deal with conversions, so actually achieving goals, buying things on these sites. So if we don't do it right, we can really affect those conversions and obviously affect the bottom line of the customers that we're building for. So some of the customers you might recognize, Starbucks, Bosch, Wired, there's many, many more. So let's just go over some of the things we're going to talk about today. So I thought I'd start by explaining what Mobify's adaptive templating is. So that's a technology that we employ to transform these desktop sites down to mobile. Then we're going to talk about some of the common testing challenges. Some of these are not necessarily mobile-only testing challenges. Some are. We'll talk a little bit about our approach to testing, what we've done since I've started there. We'll talk about the Nightwatch.js framework, which is a framework that we employ to do automated testing. We'll talk about continuously running these automated tests in the cloud and what we do, the tools we use to do that. And we'll then also talk about scaling those tests and also device testing. So first, let's just talk briefly about what Mobify's adaptive templating is. And this is a little bit hard to understand for the average layman, so if I'm going too fast or if it's not clear enough, please let me know. I'm going to take a little bit of time here to try to explain it properly. So it all starts with what we call the Mobify tag. So the Mobify tag is a small snippet of JavaScript that we get the client to place in their desktop site. It goes right under the head tag. It's the first thing that is read by the browser when the page is rendered. So that's kind of an integral part of this whole mechanism. Does anyone here understand the concept of bootstrapping? Okay, so bootstrapping is loading a very, very small piece of code that's highly performant with the idea of loading a larger piece of code afterwards. So this is effectively what the Mobify tag does. It loads a small piece of JavaScript into the page, it performs the necessary functions and also reaches out to our servers, grabs what we call a bundle and brings that down to perform the rest of the manipulation to change the site to a mobile site. So let's go a little bit more in depth about the process and how the requests and responses work within the server. So at the top here you can see the client server, so that would be the server housing the desktop site. The mobile device requests to that server, it receives the response, and this is the HTML page. This little orange block at the top, that would be the Mobify tag. So again, it's the first thing that the browser reads when it's trying to parse that page. So what we do is we halt executing the rendering of the page. So the page is not rendered in a desktop view. We then load that external bundle from our CDN, bring that down and use that to rework the content. So we'll select pieces of the desktop site, ones that we want to display on mobile, so usually a subset of whatever the desktop's displaying. We'll remix that content, change the styling, that type of thing, and then we'll re-render that content on the mobile device. So you're getting a small subset of what was originally requested. You also don't have 50 requests like you did maybe on desktop. Maybe you have 5 or something like that. So it's a subset of what you originally requested, so it's more highly performant. And as you can see, it's very dynamic. We don't require a lot of the client. Merely putting that Mobify tag on the site is enough for us, and we can do the rest. So that's very appealing to a lot of people. Does that make sense to everyone? I know it's a little bit, it's kind of crazy. There's some crazy stuff going on there, but don't worry, it's all black magic. You don't need to know about it. So let's talk about some of the testing challenges. And again, these are not necessarily specific to mobile, but some are. So the first one is devices. There are a lot of devices out there. It's really, really hard to keep up with all those devices, and it's also hard to test on all those devices. So if we try to test our sites on every single device in the ecosystem, it would take a very long time. Additionally, mobile testing on device is very, very slow. So having a QA engineer or a QA analyst go through and punch things onto a mobile device is slow. And then you have to repeat that process for every test, for every device. Well, I think that that can indicate that there's exponential growth there in the time that it takes to execute tests. So your tests will run basically as slow as your slowest QA. So this is an easy problem to tackle. This is a very, very difficult problem to tackle. And I'm not sure that we have the solution, but we're working towards one. We have some ideas. So this is a sneak peek at Mobify's device test lab. We just pile these all into the floor in the middle of the office and then kind of dig through them when we want one. That's not really what it is. But anyway, what I'm trying to indicate here is that there's a lot of devices and they're growing all the time. And so for us to service that lab, we would have to continually buy new devices, provision those devices, ensure that they're running the right versions of OSs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very hard to keep up, and it's a challenge that we have right now. Another thing is networks, and specifically because we deal with the web, networks are a very difficult thing to deal with. Network latency is a problem. Performance on mobile is a problem, so we need to worry about on the performance side, we need to make sure that the sites that we're running are performant, we're delivering things quickly. That's something that we continually test for. On the other side of things, related to mobile automation, latency can cause all sorts of irregularities with your test infrastructure. So if I'm running tests locally on my machine and I have everything running really quickly because it's all local, then I don't really have the latency issues that I may have if I push those tests up to a cloud server somewhere that is across the other side of the country, and my server that I'm testing is on this side of the country. So those types of issues are exacerbated with testing, and so those are the things that we're fighting towards to kind of work out. Variable numbers of carriers. There's lots of different carriers as well. We've experienced issues with carriers where they helpfully manipulate the HTML that's being sent down to a device and take all the scripts that are on that page and jam them all together. Well, that's fantastic, but as you can see, we rely on that Mobify tag being in the position that it is in order for our technology to work. So those helpful manipulations have actually caused us a lot of headaches over time, so not ideal for us. So we're aware that there's also lots of problems with different carriers, and we have to be aware of that also. Test quality is going to be something that everyone will face, and this is not specific to mobile at all. This is about how you go about engineering your tests. This is also about helping the business side of your business understand the value of tests, the value of automation, and convincing them that it's actually a really good thing. I believe it's a really good thing. I think a lot of people do believe that it's a really good thing, but that story is very hard to tell to some people sometimes when it's not readily apparent. And if it's eating a lot of time and costing a lot, that's not necessarily a great indicator of success or quality. So tests need to be architected really well. They need lots of care and attention, and they can't be considered to be a second-class citizen. So again, consistency in the test runs is hugely important, because there's no point in scaling out a massive pile of tests just so that you can have a checkmark item on your list to say, yes, we do automation. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we need to ensure that tests are running consistently. Now, really specific to us is a butterfly effect that we have, where any changes that happen on a desktop site can impact our mobile site. Because we're leveraging that desktop site to build that mobile site and dynamically selecting items from within that site, any updates that they do can adversely affect our mobile builds. So we have to be proactively testing and making sure that we're aware of what's going on, we're aware of when desktop has changed and has subsequently broken the mobile site, and we can react really, really quickly and not wait for them to call us up and say, hey, our site's not looking very good anymore. So that's a challenge that we have specifically. So let's just touch on our current approach to testing. And I want to emphasize that when I started in January, there was really not much of an automated testing infrastructure in place. We did dabble here and there in-house, but not a lot of it was successful. So we use Agile Scrum. So that means that our development work is divided into sprints, and the engineering and QA occurs within those sprints. So just to kind of illustrate it a little bit more, the sprints progress over time, and engineering is very, very small time boxed, so they complete tasks, and once they're complete, They route those through to the QA tests them. But the QA also has to loop back every single time and at least at a minimum smoke test what was previously done in the sprints so that we know that we haven't broken anything. So as you can see, with manual testing, your tests may start off small at first, but they quickly grow over time. And so the time that it takes to execute those tests is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and really it's quite unmanageable. So think of it kind of like a small snowball. So the snowball is very manageable at first, has a nice form to it and everything. We build, we test, and we repeat this throughout the sprints. And what do we have at the end? This gigantic pile of snow. We have a large, unmanageable pile of tests that aren't necessarily accurately repeatable every single time with a manual tester. So we rely on those QA engineers to follow the test steps the same every time. It's not always the case. So we wanted to try to flip the process around a little bit. So the idea is that QA writes a small amount of tests every sprint, and the regression tests can then be repeatedly run in each successive sprint. So by the end, instead of having a massive pile of work, you actually have one large automated test that you can run beginning to end. And it's much faster for us. So again, let's take the analogy of the snowball. Fairly well formed at first. Over time, when we build up our automated tests, hopefully at the end, they can actually run on their own, and you can just push them down the hill. So it makes work more manageable, and we definitely want lazy QA engineers. We want people who want to automate, who are driven to automate, and who are driven for efficiency and want to achieve efficiency. So that's definitely what we're working towards. So development-wise, our development is typically done in Chrome, in the Chrome browser, and then our automated testing runs in Chrome, emulating a mobile browser, and we also supplement it right now with manual smoke testing on device. So usually with iOS, we do iOS 5, iOS 6, and then the latest, and then for Android, we'll do Android 2.3, Android 4, and the latest. Android 2.3 particularly causes a lot of problems for us. A lot of bugs arise from Android 2.3. So let's touch on what tools we use to achieve these goals. So we employ a new framework it's fairly new. It's gaining steam. It's called Nightwatch.js. It's a Node.js based WebDriver wrapper. So WebDriver is a very, very common automated testing tool that is used by lots and lots of companies. Google uses WebDriver a lot. They have put a lot of development time into it. It's a very, very stable platform. So we use Nightwatch.js. It's got great documentation. It itself is also fairly stable too, so that's a really good thing, very, very important for what I said before, consistency. And we're also contributors to the project, so that makes it really fun. It also makes it so that we understand the tools that we're using in depth and we know how they're working and we can respond to things when they don't work. So at its core, Nightwatch.js uses what's called the JSON wire protocol. So this is a very, very common generic protocol that WebDriver uses to communicate with any remote instances. So this is a REST API for those who understand what a REST API is. It basically allows you to make requests out to a server that then drive a browser, and then you get the responses back, and you can interpret those responses as to whether the tests have passed or failed. So just a quick example of what the JSON wire protocol looked like. So this is just a bunch of URLs that you would send requests out to that, again, drive browser actions, and then you would receive responses from those actions, and then you can do whatever you want to them, respond to them in any way, shape, or form. So I just want to illustrate something about the JSON wire protocol and about open standards in general, and how using open standards when you're building these types of things is very, very important. Open standards are well established. They also allow you to communicate with all sorts of different services, and that's what we're actually looking to do rather than try and solve all the problems in-house ourselves. So just a quick outline of how Nightwatch works at Mobify. So just to show you that this would be a test script. The test would run. It would make a call out using the JSON wire protocol to a Selenium server, which would then drive a browser, perform some actions, send some responses back, all the way through back to Nightwatch, and Nightwatch would interpret those responses and then render results to show passes or failures. So it's a fairly simple process, but there's a few moving parts here. So you can kind of see how everything works together. So our old, like I mentioned before, our old in-house system that we used was not really simple. They were WebDriver scripts, yes, but they were all written in one gigantic file, basically in one test. So it was very unmanageable and not a great implementation. And this is, again, very common to see is people don't treat building a test infrastructure as well as they would treat building their own internal software or product. And that's not a great approach because you really, really, really need to ensure that you're engineering your tests exactly with the same care and attention that you would any product that you're developing. Again, it's going to lend back to that consistency, and you want to make sure that you're writing consistent tests and building a consistent infrastructure. So the nice thing about Nightwatch is it's very, very simple, and it also manages to abstract a lot of the complexity around running tests or writing tests away from the engineers, the QA engineers. So effectively, they don't have to deal with any configuration. They just write tests and tests only. So it's quite nice. So let's just watch Nightwatch execute a few tests here. So as you can see, we start the command in the terminal, and we can actually immediately see the browser being driven. And you can see tests being executed one after the other. For every test, Nightwatch opens a browser, so everything's isolated, so it's an atomic test, and performs actions, gets feedback back, and then reports either success or failure back into the terminal. So it's great. You can see some immediate results. You can track the progress. You can see things happening. You can see things not happening, and you also get a lot of immediate gratification with lots of little green check marks on your screen, which always is very pleasant to see. So just to illustrate how the simplicity of Nightwatch again, this is just a really, really simple test script, and this would be a great example of something that Mobify employs to protect ourselves against those changes in a desktop site. So what we do is we test for a certain number of selectors to be present in the page, and if they're not present, we know that we have a breakage there. The ingredients of this test are very simple, just a simple test name at the top, and a very common pattern for writing the test and forming the test. So you have a browser that the object that you use there, and then you just run commands and assertions on that, and then you can end the session at the end. So it's all very, very simple, really easy to write, and really easy to get up and running. So just an example of a passing test. Again, you can see the test title at the top. So there's some commands executed here. There's an assertion there, and it actually itemizes what happened at the end, so you can get an idea of what's going on. Again, a failing test there too, so you can see that we don't have an item that was expected to be present in the DOM, and it reports that failure immediately to you. And additionally, you get the aggregated results of an entire test suite that you're running. Yeah?
Does it tell you if there's an extra element in it?
It depends on how you craft the test. Yeah, I mean, so we're only testing for elements that we expect to be present. We're not testing for all elements. So you would have to itemize specific elements that you're testing for, and anything else would not be fair game in the test. So. Additionally, Nightwatch is great in that it has a great extensibility layer. So you can extend Nightwatch with your own custom commands, custom assertions. You can write reusable code for your testers that is tailored specifically to your organization. A great example of this is we have this wait until Mobified command. So again, what we're doing with Mobify is we're taking a page, we're halting execution of the rendering, we're performing some action, and re-rendering the page. That takes a little bit of time, and if we were to not wait for the page to be fully complete, it would try and execute tests against a blank page. So we would have massive failures all over the place. So right off the bat, we were able to wire that into Nightwatch immediately to ensure that these tests would run consistently for us. So the simplicity also has allowed us to go from pretty much 0 tests up into the hundreds really, really quickly. So that's really compelling to me because that tells me that tests are very, very easy to write, and we're going to be able to build a nice test coverage across lots of sites really, really quickly. And that's compelling for sure. Additionally, some of our QA engineers came from a non-scripting background or a non-engineering background. Some have comp sci degrees, some don't. So there's a real variation there in the skill levels. Regardless of that, Nightwatch has allowed everybody to get on board with scripting tests. So everyone is writing tests, and even people who are fairly non-technical have caught on really quickly and in fact excelled in some cases, for sure. So we've leveled our QA up quite a bit. It's one of the goals of Mobify is to increase growth in our people, and this definitely helps with that goal. Does anyone have any quick questions about Nightwatch at all?
How did you go about getting your QA team to be engineers instead of testers?
Good question, Ben. So what we did was, initially, it wasn't that there was resistance. Everyone was on board with testing, but there was a lot of fear there. So people didn't really understand, I'm going to go from here doing this every day to over here, where I'm primarily wanting to write automation. So that wasn't an easy task. What we did was we did a lot of one-on-one sessions and also group sessions. So we did weekly one-on-ones with people where we actually sat down, one engineer and one QA, and we really walked them through how to write tests, and we adjusted things to their level. So we progressed at a pace that they were comfortable with, and they got a lot out of that. Additionally, we also came together in teams every other week and talked about the common issues around testing and how we were going to proceed, and what problems people were experiencing and how to move forward. And in fact, I tried to make it very, very simple at first and not boggle people's minds too much with too much detail around how to architect tests and this and that. But what it actually ended up being was that people they grew too fast, and they actually wanted more information quicker, which was a real pleasant surprise for me. I found that people really managed to get on board with this really quickly and really have a great understanding of that.
How big's the user community for this tool?
For Nightwatch?
Yeah.
Well, it's an open source project on GitHub, and they have, I think, there's a couple of thousand stars on that, so it's pretty big. It was listed on a really big site that lots of engineers use called Hacker News, and once it was on Hacker News, everyone knew about it. So there's a lot of people contributing. There's a lot of issues being raised in the issue tracker, which is actually a good thing because it means people are using it and bugs will get fixed. And Andre, who's the original developer in the Netherlands, he's fantastic, super responsive, and has worked with us to do a ton of stuff. So it's a fantastic framework for sure. So there's other things that we've used too to automate, and we have a larger tool set for continuous test automation. So we use a few different things. So I alluded to the fact that we use GitHub. So GitHub is a web-based version control system. So they host version control. So Git being the client, and it allows you to store versions of code, and it promotes good code reuse, protects your code, and protects it from changes and any risk. It's very important for structured development, and also allows you to make changes on separate branches and collaborate, et cetera, et cetera. We also use Circle CI, which is a cloud continuous integration provider. So it allows you to run builds in the cloud, also run tests in the cloud, allows you to scale out tests a little bit better. And we also use Heroku, which is another cloud provider, but it's for apps. So we wrote some stuff in Heroku that would perform scheduling for us, that would run tests continuously in certain intervals of time. So when you put them all together, we have GitHub for version control, which links together with Circle CI, and it's a very, very simple integration process there. It's literally a one-click process to wire up a build in Circle CI with something in GitHub. So really, really great system. And then again, we supplement it with Heroku to do some scheduling. So this would be a little example of code that we have, a Crocs build that we have up on GitHub. So our engineers would push code up here, and subsequently that code would run on Circle CI and would perform not only a build, but also all the Nightwatch tests as well. So we would get this continuous feedback of whether tests passed or failed. And you also get the feedback within the UI of GitHub as well. So there's some feedback there, which is great. I've kind of cheated a little bit because this is a pull request, and so this is not necessarily indicative of the UI that you see, but you do get that kind of feedback. Additionally, we use HipChat as our internal chat mechanism. So we've also wired Circle CI up into HipChat so that with our team rooms and our project rooms, you actually get the feedback of whether a build passed or failed immediately in that room. So there's high visibility there for engineers, for QA, and for project managers as well. So it's really fantastic. And this is a relatively boring slide. It's just an illustration of us triggering builds through Heroku on scheduled. So the next issue that we're going to talk about is scaling and device testing. So WebDriver is a, sorry, you had a question?
Yes, just a question back on the continuous test automation. Do you have any problems that some of your tests are simply too long to run every build?
Yeah, we do.
You can't do that, right?
Well, no, we do. We can do it. The main problem is that right now, tests run sequentially for us. We haven't scaled out to that point yet, so tests run sequentially. So you're basically going to be as slow as all the tests put together. So that can be quite long and can take hours potentially. We want to ensure that we're not doing that, but there's steps that we have to take first to kind of solidify our consistency there and make sure that things are running all the time, every time, and then look to scaling out after that. I think that that's probably the approach that we're looking to take.
Did this all happen organically in terms of the process, finding these solutions, or did you have a plan to start it?
Yeah, so I came from a product background where we used WebDriver extensively, so I was already on board with using WebDriver. I knew that how good it could be. I knew how you could write tests quickly and get a lot of gains from automation, but I also knew how inconsistent it could be as well. So I was very cautious at first, and I looked at a few different solutions, so it wasn't immediately that we went to Nightwatch for sure. We looked at a few other Node.js-based WebDriver frameworks that weren't as consistent. They didn't work as well, and they also weren't as simple as Nightwatch is to use. The nice thing about Nightwatch immediately that struck me was the simplicity of what the tests look like. They're so simple. There's nothing, no configuration, no garbage in the test file itself. It's a very elegant and simple file, so it's really easy to read, it's really easy to write. The engineers don't have to worry about all that stuff, and that's really compelling. So we started out with using Nightwatch a little bit, and then we kind of progressed onward. Internally, we use Circle CI for the product side, so that was already kind of established, so we already knew that that worked, and we could just wire that up whenever we wanted. We also use Sauce Labs as well on this product side, so we knew that we could wire that up eventually. We haven't got to that point yet, because again, we're focused right now on stabilization, so we're in a phase right now where I feel like we've got a lot of experience, we've written a lot of tests, but I feel like they need to be completely stabilized before we scale out, because it doesn't really make sense to have a gigantic pile of unstable tests. We want to have a sensible, stable set of tests.
So in your mind, how far are you in your sort of plan, or 20%?
Yeah.
50%?
I'd say around 50%, rough estimate. Again, I say we've made some significant gains, and I think the mindset of people was the slowest thing to change. It was getting people used to, I'm not primarily manual testing, I'm not primarily using this and using that, I'm writing tests first and then supplementing that with other activities. And I think that that was the thing that we struggled with a lot. And then also just getting people comfortable with, coding. I mean, like I said, I'm really happy with how people progress. They progressed really, really quickly. But I think there's still a lot of work to do, because it's not just about knowing how to write the test. That's like knowing how to use the software. It's like using it well. So knowing how to write tests well, consistent. So there's a certain structure that you can use to ensure that your tests are going to pass more than they're going to fail. And that doesn't come right away. That's something that you kind of have to get a bit of intuition over and some experience. So yeah, so that's something that we're still working on. Yeah.
Who and how are your tests defined? I don't mean in code. I mean, how do you know
what to test? Yeah.
Who manages that?
Well,
I'll give just an example. I mean, I'll try and translate it to your language, but there are differences between browsers, and we do a lot of testing against mobile devices.
Yep.
And there's always this 80, 90, 98% of the tests are identical across different environments. So there's a strong temptation to write tests in a way that is consistent. So the same test applies to many different places.
Right.
And then you always get that one situation where it's different in that browser.
Absolutely.
So then it's like, well, do you mirror all your test cases for that 2%?
Yeah.
Or, so what do you...
That's a really great question, and I totally understand everything that you're saying. And the approach that we take is that breadth first approach, because I think that's the right approach to take. I think you can get the most bang for your buck in the shortest amount of time. I mean, this is akin to developing for IE or IE6, right? It's like you spend all your activity finding those little quirky little things that the padding's weird and this and that. I mean, you can kill tons and tons of time doing that. And there's arguably some value for certain people, for sure. But if you take that breadth first approach where you identify, like, these are really common elements that we want to test across everything, and we don't really care about the intricacies of this browser or that browser, and target those first, and then supplement that with things that your QAs, through experience, know what to look for. Like I said earlier, Android 2.3 causes us a lot of problems. It does, and the QAs know that, and they also know what to look for. So having that breadth first approach, testing all the usual things and the safe things first, and then identifying those other really quirky things after, I think is the right approach. And I think it manages your time the best, and we get the most bang for our buck, for sure. Yeah?
Any specific reason why you chose a node-based framework, or is it just because you use Node in-house?
Yep, that's pretty much it. I mean, it was either Python or Node. I mean, we use Python in-house, and we also use Node. I mean, JavaScript is a huge language for our organization. There's huge depth of knowledge in JavaScript. So yes, we use Node in-house. On our team, on the customer success team, the language is JavaScript. So the front-end engineers, that's what they use. They only use JavaScript. They don't touch the server side really at all, except for making calls out to the server and getting responses back. They don't touch server code at all. So having a language that was already something that they knew was really, really important, for sure. So let's talk about scaling. So WebDriver tests, fantastic. I love the little turtle, he's fantastic too. But they're slow. WebDriver tests are slow because they're driving a browser and they're performing actions. So it would be better if we could run all those turtles concurrently and actually get those tests run faster. So you would basically be as slow as, or as fast as your slowest turtle. So you can do that using a few things. You can run your tests in parallel using things like Sauce Labs. So Sauce Labs allows you to run tests on something called Selenium Grid, which will actually parallelize all your tests, and all your tests will run in parallel for the number of servers that you're running. So if you're running 3 tests concurrently, they're going to run 3 times faster. So that's definitely compelling. Additionally, just to circle back to the JSON Wire protocol, Sauce Labs uses the JSON Wire protocol, so that's why open standards are very important. Appium, Gloria and I had a great conversation about Appium before, but Appium also allows you to run tests on device. So that's very compelling, obviously, because again, you have a massive ecosystem of devices and you want to target those devices, but it's not necessarily the best approach to try to do that in-house. And it's always better, in my opinion, to leverage a cloud provider that does that. That's what they do. So you go to things, you go to companies that specialize because they do that all the time, and that's their only focus. So my advice is leverage that type of thing. Appium is one option, Browser Stack is another, and again, let them handle the infrastructure. Don't try and handle that infrastructure in-house. I don't think it's very scalable. So just to bring it back to the challenges that we spoke about earlier, so devices, what can you do with devices? Again, you can use things like Browser Stack or Appium to test on device. You can supplement that with manual testing in-house. That's an option for sure. That's what we do, and I think we'll probably continue to do that. In terms of networks, writing tests to accommodate networks and latency and variances in networks and that type of thing, very important. You want to ensure that your tests are written consistently, so definitely architecting your tests well is important. And again, you can wire in performance testing with your automation. We're looking to build something into Nightwatch that actually does some sort of performance testing with our automation, but we haven't really worked that out yet. And test quality, I'm going to hammer this one home. Very, very important. Architect your test infrastructure. We use Nightwatch.js because it leverages a known standard in WebDriver. It has a really, really clean API. It's very, very easy to use. And again, in-house, we have lots of experience with JavaScript, so it's a natural fit for sure. So in terms of wins, definitely we have a leveled up QA team. That's a win for us. We can better manage the growing number of projects that we have at any given point in time with mobile automation. Increased efficiency for sure, and I get to come and do talks like this one. So it's fantastic. We're definitely not done though. It's a work in progress. Like I said, we're around 50% kind of on our way. I probably lied. It's probably much less, but it sounded good anyway. So we're on the right track, and I feel pretty confident that we're definitely heading in the right direction. So that's everything. Thanks, guys. Cool. So yeah, questions?
What does done look like for you?
Sorry?
What does done look like?
What a nebulous question that is. I don't know. I have kind of an idea. I'd love to see automation run similar to what we're doing right now. QA writes tests, they push them up to GitHub. They're built through CircleCI or scaled out through Sauce Labs or Appium or some other thing. I would love to see a decent breadth of tests on our target devices, because obviously we have a list of devices that we mandate that we support. So if we could run automation on those devices consistently in parallel, that would be fantastic.
Are you also sort of forced, or is it a goal that you protect against changes for every one of your active customers?
Yeah.
The breadth would cover every single one of your active customers?
We actually do. We in most cases we do need to make sure that we're protecting against changes for sure. And I think it's just good policy to do that based on the technology that we have, because interestingly, like I think we have some really fantastic technology. There is that unknown element to it that we don't control. So we don't write the actual site server side. We just use that site. So we're basically at the mercy of that desktop site. That adds some risk to what we do, but then it's just it's a matter of mitigating that risk and figuring out how to reduce the surface area of that risk. And I think that we're going towards that with automation and having those tests that actually check to see if those elements that we expect to be transformed into the page are actually there, or is some widget missing or something like that. So yes.
Can you productize your automation though, give that to the customer so that when they make changes to their websites, they can run your automation?
Yes. That's actually already in progress. We're planning on surfacing the ability to write and run and schedule Nightwatch tests within our cloud platform. So we actually have a cloud server that services these builds, performs the publishing of a Mobify site, the bundling of the assets and the delivery of those assets through our CDN. So we're definitely going to expose that type of thing. What I'd love to see too is sort of like a graph of test runs over time to see, so you can get an immediate feedback of stability of your site, for sure.
So what was your biggest challenge?
All of it. The biggest challenge. I think this is not specific to Mobify at all. This is any automation is helping people understand the value of automation, but also convincing them that the activity and the time you're spending is actually going to something good. I think a lot of the time people know that they should do automation, so they do automation, but then they just slap it in there. And it doesn't work because it's not had care and attention. And if you don't water the automation, it's not going to grow. If you're not taking care about what you're implementing, then it's not going to be successful. You don't get something for nothing, and I think sometimes people expect that you should. So, yes?
Most of the percentage testing written by developers and most of the percentage written by QA. I guess using test-driven development?
So we have a number of different points of testing that we use. So we use unit, integration, and system testing. So the system testing is done by QA, and also myself. But just because I like writing tests. But the QA handles the system tests primarily. And then engineers would handle any unit or integration tests. But that's more at the code level, and that's more isolated code. Does that make sense?
To add, what we are doing is, and that's how the business has changed, that all test engineers, now we expect them, they should be able to do test automation. But what we are realizing is pure manual testers, many times they just don't, many times it's difficult for them to appreciate the software part. So, and that has also changed the way we hire and train and all those things. Because most of the customers, they will start with manual testing, but then they say, we need test automation. And then if that test engineer, whatever domain knowledge that person has, if that cannot be applied to test automation, so that's something similar to what you were saying, that if somebody might have come from, say, game testing.
Yes. But, no, that's a great point for sure, because it's true. And I think having your QA exposed more to the technical side of things just helps, because they understand how things work more. And if you understand how things work, then you can understand the nuts and bolts, and you probably know how to break it more too. So that's a good thing for us. We want them to break stuff.
So since you're running an agile squad or agile teams, you've got all of your individual sprint tests being done inside that automation bit. Do you then have those same QA people take those tests out, drop them into the regression framework, or is it not a big deal because you're simply running every test you drop? Yeah,
it's all integrated. So the tests are written and run all within the same build. So say we have a project. So for us we have a project scaffold. So we have when a project starts, we generate a bunch of source files. Included in those source files is everything that you need to run Nightwatch. So immediately, as soon as a project's generated and does nothing, you can run Nightwatch tests. There are tests in there that are example tests right away, right off the bat, that get you going. So it's all wired up, it's all ready to go, and we already have a particular file. So for Circle CI, there's one little file that you put in your solution there, or your project, and when that gets pushed up to GitHub, you can wire that up automatically, and it has instructions for Circle CI about how to perform your tests. That's all integrated right away into our project scaffolds. So the build's all ready to go. It's literally a matter of writing some tests, pushing that up, and then pushing a button in Circle CI. And I'm not joking when I say you push one button in Circle CI and it's wired up, and it's going to run your tests right after that. So it's fantastic. It's really good. It's really quick. Yes?
How much time do you spend on maintaining your automation tests? You find a lot of time just maintaining open ones in case something breaks.
Yep, definitely. Derek, do you have kind of an idea on how much time is spent? I mean, really what it is right now is that we've written a lot of tests. Not all the tests are stable right now. And mainly the instability comes from pushing them up onto Circle. Because again, you're going to get that latency factor where you've written the tests with an optimistic idea of how long things are going to take. Like an AJAX call goes out, something comes back and returns a chunk of HTML. That may take not much time at all on your machine, but maybe Circle servers are over on the East Coast and it takes a lot longer. So trying to flatten that out and stabilize that has been a main activity for us right now, and I think that's taken more time than fixing tests.
Fixing tests is taking about, I'd say, a couple of hours a week, maybe 2, 3.
Yeah, it's not bad. I think, again,
it's so simple. The way it's written, it's really you go in, oh, I'm missing this element on the page, you either add it, or you remove it, or you're looking for an element.
whatever your functional test is. It's just the way they're written. It's so easy to fix.
Yeah, it really does get all the cruft out of the test and let you just kind of get to executing test steps. Yeah.
You talked about, I can't remember the name of the function, but there was
the wait for Mobify. Yeah.
That sort of extension, I assume that's happening at sort of a framework infrastructure level. How much investment in that relative to the test authoring itself?
You mean writing custom commands? Like, did they take a long time?
You started at zero and pretty quickly you had some tasks.
Yes.
You started to see the hockey stick.
Yes.
I'm assuming that a lot of the investment up front was perhaps investigating and then tweaking.
Not as much as you would think, yes. Definitely there was some, for sure. And that was an activity that we recognized right away, that this is something that we have to get done before anything gets written, because if we didn't, nothing would work. It would be trying to execute things against a white page. So we did spend a bit of time, definitely not as much as you think. The reason being is because I already had encountered all these problems from my last job, and doing lots of different testing with lots of variants in the application that I was using. And because of that, I kind of knew the approach to take to try to solve those problems. The wait for Mobify one was actually quite simple to fix. The Ajax problem's a little bit harder, but we've actually managed to solve that problem too. So, and I'm happy to share that with people if you want to come and bug me later. Yes?
Yeah, it sounds like all of your test suites are sort of project-based.
Yes.
How do you maximize code reuse as far as the automation tests, where you may have one script you used on this side that could be used here, could be used here, you've got 3 different QA guys writing them.
Totally.
How do you try and combat that?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question too, for sure. So right now, like I said, the original approach, because we had such a variation of skill sets there, we tried to focus on really simple stuff. So we didn't worry too much about code reuse and drying things up and that kind of stuff. Don't repeat yourself, for those who don't know what dry means. But so what we've tried to do now is there's multiple kind of steps that you can take. So the next step that we took with our existing tests was to try to refactor those a little bit into something more reusable within the actual project itself, right? So we've extracted common things out, like signing into a page and that type of stuff, or performing a number of common steps to get yourself to a checkout flow, because again, we're in e-commerce, primarily an e-commerce servicing company, so that was a really important thing for us. So we've taken that approach where we've refactored that into that project level. The next step, I think, for us is identifying those common patterns or those those points of reuse, and refactoring those into libraries and things like that can be used by the QA engineers. Again, I'm a big proponent of engineering and well-designed systems. But at the same time, I'm also aware of, with tests, you take a slightly different approach, and it's good to not introduce too much complexity into the tests, because again, you have this wide range of people. I could get somebody that we hire who's junior from out of school, who really doesn't know much about what they're doing. And if we have a very, very complex test infrastructure, it's going to be a real barrier for them to get going and get going fast. But I found that on the contrary, with Nightwatch, we've actually managed to get people ramped up really, really quickly. And so that's a benefit. So it's a balance. We're not there yet. It's in the back of my mind, but we're not there yet, and I know that those things are important for sure, but again, we're not exactly sure how we want to proceed with that stuff for sure. I guess with the code reuse, it may be that I put them into a custom Nightwatch command. That's an option, and we have done that. So we do have some code reuse there for sure. In terms of other bits and pieces, we haven't really arrived at that yet, and I'm not sure where we're going with that yet.
So can we take more questions, or maybe last question? Yeah, go ahead.
So you, from what I saw, maybe I'm interpreting wrong, you're doing browser tests in Chrome.
Yes.
Have you encountered a problem where you've written tests for Chrome and they work great, but then when you get to the device, the same test, something is failing that is passing in Chrome? Yeah,
no, that definitely happens for sure. And that's why, right, so again, I think thinking of things with that breadth first approach, where you're testing the general cases of functionality, in our experience, serves us very well, because it actually covers the code quite well, in the sense that you manage to find those bugs that are common across like any browser on any device or whatever. And I think that we haven't really found too much where there have been like really weird intricacies here and there, other than through manual testing of specific browsers. And again, we're not running all our tests right now on, like our automated tests, on device right now. We are scaling out to do that, but we are not there yet. So primarily, device testing is done manually. But again, our QA engineers have enough experience that they know what to look for. We've got the automation that covers the general cases, and then they kind of go in and dig in and know, oh, this doesn't work. Usually the accordion's usually messed up there or whatever. And we target those and kind of approach it that way. Yeah. Great.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Steve.
Okay.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.